Can you put frozen meat in a slow cooker? Using a slow cooker is definitely one of the easiest ways to make a meal, but that doesn't mean there aren't plenty of ways to ruin your food. Fresh herbs add sublime hints of flavor if dropped into the slow cooker at the right time. That being said, due to their delicate makeup, your fresh herbs will be most flavorful if you wait to add them until the last 30 to 60 minutes of cooking. If they're allowed to cook for too long, they'll lose a lot of their flavor. This is essentially the opposite of how to use dried or woody herbs in the slow cooker, which should go in at the beginning of the cooking process. These must cook longer to coax the flavorful oils out and soften them up. You may also find that your recipes cooked in the slow cooker require more dried herbs than recipes cooked by other means. Instant pots have made home cooks forget that slow cookers don't have the same kind of cooking power when it comes to cooking frozen meat, or frozen anything really, but meat in particular.
You just don't get it, do you?
That's because it'll take too long for the meat to reach 165 degrees Fahrenheit, giving harmful bacteria like salmonella a chance to grow. It's true that your average slow cooker reaches temps as high as 280 degrees, which is high enough to kill off bacteria under normal circumstances. However, the cooker remains in what's called the danger zone, 40 to 140 degrees, for too long to kill off the bugs in the way that the Instant Pot can. What may throw inexperienced home cooks off is the parameters at which pressure cookers like the Instant Pot function. They work like slow cookers at some settings, but their pressure cooker feature, something that your slow cooker lacks, means that starting with frozen meat isn't an issue. The pressure cooker heats up rapidly, heating your meat to safe temps along with it. So basically, thaw your meat before putting it in the slow cooker. Cooking veggies in the slow cooker requires you to follow an order of operations. Otherwise, you'll end up with crunchy potatoes and soggy asparagus. Dried plant foods like legumes take the longest to cook, sometimes up to 6 or 8 hours. They also need to soak for around 6 hours before cooking. If you're cooking your recipe overnight, these foods need to go into the slow cooker first. On high, they'll cook in 6 hours. On low, it'll take 8 hours. Veggies in the middle range, like cabbage, green peppers, and eggplant, require 2 or 3 hours of cooking. Most other veggies will require 30 minutes or less to cook, with mushrooms, tomatoes, and greens taking a fraction of the time. Searing meat before putting it into the slow cooker seems a bit redundant. Why would you need to cook your meat before you cook your meat? However, from a taste perspective, you miss out on a lot of complexity if you don't sear it first. Also, you're basically guaranteed to incur the wrath of Gordon Ramsay if you don't do it. Possibly the most terrifying adverse reaction of all.
Donkey!
Called the Maillard reaction, this step caramelizes the meat's exterior and enhances its umami flavor, giving it a savory punch. It makes meat look, feel, and taste like meat, browned to perfection, with a crisped surface covering tender insides. Coating the meat in seasoned flour takes this process one step further. The flour creates the thick, saucy goodness that people often associate with stews cooked in the slow cooker. Will it harm your meat if you don't sear it? Technically, there's no requirement that you brown any meat before you put it into a slow cooker. However, it's likely to taste drab at best if you skip this step. Here's a hypothetical for you. If you were to make a surf and turf recipe, would it be okay just to toss the beef and the fish into the slow cooker at the same time? We won't judge you for saying yes, but really, the answer is no. Different meats have different cooking times in the slow cooker, just like they do on the stove. Granted, those cooking times run longer in the slow cooker, but the principle is the same. You'll get the best results if you cook each type of meat in the right way and for the right length of time. For example, meat cuts like pork or beef roasts take the longest, up to 10 hours on low. If the same roast is cooked on high, you'll need about 7 hours. Beef roast comes somewhere in the middle at 8 hours for a slow cooking time and about 6 hours for a fast cooking time. Fish takes about 1 to 3 hours. Now, going back to the hypothetical surf and turf example, the beef should go into the pot first. The fish goes in last. Everything might come out of the pot at the same time, but that's not the case for how the ingredients go in, especially when it comes to meat. If anything is set it and forget it, it's the slow cooker. But this cooker advantage is also one of its dangers. When you've cooked something in a crock pot, you face the temptation to leave the food in the cooker on warm until you're ready to eat it. However, the slow cooker isn't just a place that warms up your food. It's also a comfy nest for less desirable inhabitants, like botulism and other harmful bacteria under certain conditions. This concerns, again, what food scientists call the sweet spot, 40 to 140 degrees. But don't be fooled by the name. Eating food left at the sweet spot for too long is anything but sweet. At those temperatures, the microscopic creepy crawlies that have settled on your food food become active and have the potential to create all sorts of mayhem in your digestive system. This isn't to say that you can't leave your food warming in your slow cooker at all. You can, but you do have to limit the amount of time. Leaving your slow cooker on the warm mode for up to 2 hours is okay. 4 hours is definitely pushing it. Once your food has been on warm for an hour or two, put it into the fridge for safekeeping.
For your health.
Bargain shopping aficionados know that you shouldn't shop when you're hungry because you'll put too much food in your cart. Maybe a similar rule should exist for slow cooker cooking because you might have the tendency to load it to the brim. This practice will cost you, just as putting too much food in your cart costs you. In this case, an overfull slow cooker means that your food may cook unevenly, leaving you with raw, crunchy carrots and mushy noodles in the same dish, hypothetically speaking. This is unappetizing at best, and that's not the only problem that arises. As the liquids get to bubbling, water condenses on the lid. This creates a seal that acts as a suction, pulling the liquid out of the cooker and depositing it onto the counter in small puddles. If you always have a liquid mess around the bottom of your slow cooker, that's probably why. The solution in both cases is to fill the cooker only about 2/3 of the way full. The contents cook more evenly, allowing the flavors to steep into the food. The bubbling over action is mitigated because the top of the food is nowhere near the top of the slow cooker. Just like you have to be careful about how much food you add to a slow cooker, you also have to be mindful of how much liquid you're including. This is because slow cookers are designed to discourage evaporation, which is why there's so much steam clinging to the lid of the cooker once cooking ends. Additionally, the steam on the lid eventually drips back down into the food, causing it to get soggy. Some experienced cooks make it a practice to put less liquid into their recipes if they're cooking them in the slow cooker instead of on the stove for this very reason. They'll cut the liquid by as much as half of what the recipe calls for. If the thought of reducing the liquid in your slow cooker by that much makes you nervous, you might try reducing the amount of liquid in increments until you find just the right amount for cooking that particular recipe. Going off of the overfilling aspect, food that's improperly layered in the slow cooker opens up the potential for meals that aren't cooked evenly as well. Here's the order in which you should stack your ingredients. The bottom layer of your slow cooker should have foods like potatoes, turnips, some cuts of meat, and other foods that require longer cooking times. From a mechanical perspective, the heat is the greatest at the bottom. Putting denser, heartier foods closer to this heat source ensures that they can cook all the way through. Less dense foods, like green beans and bell peppers, like the middle of the cooker. Foods with a high water content, such as spinach or peas, as well as fresh herbs, cook best at the top of the pot, away from the most intense heat. And some foods, like your meats, will cook by themselves for some time before you add the other less hearty foods because the cooking times for those other foods are less. Finally, it's also worth noting that the slow cooker usually has just a couple of cooking settings, with low being 160-ish degrees. Such temperatures still cook the densest foods, but it will take longer for food to finish cooking, even if you layer it correctly. The old adage about how a watched pot never boils gets a bit of an update here. A slow cooker whose lid is removed too many times never boils. Blame this phenomenon on the heat loss that happens when you remove the lid. While this might seem like a no-brainer, the impetus to do so is innocent enough. Maybe you think the food needs a good stir, or maybe it could use a bit more seasoning. Toward the end of your cooking and brewing session, removing the lid to stir or add seasonings is okay. However, this is the only time you should remove the lid from the slow cooker. Midway through the cooking process, removing the lid also removes between 10 and 20 degrees from the food's temperature. Everything about the slow cooker pretty much comes down to the slow burn. Each peek under the lid adds up to 5 minutes or more to your food's cooking time. So, for example, if you've checked the food 12 times during an 8-hour cooking period, you've delayed dinner time by an hour. That's a lot of time to lose when you're hungry. And if you have dinner guests who are waiting to be fed, this can have an especially ill effect. Anyone who cooks regularly has at least one bad memory of taking much longer than intended to complete a meal.
Not even close.
Your investment in a slow cooker represents one of the best money-saving moves you could have made, and not just because it allows you to batch cook. Instead, it's important to look at one of the other benefits of having a slow cooker. What it does for your cheap cuts of meat is nothing short of amazing. It takes them from chewy and tough to tender and delicious, all in the space of about 6 or 8 hours or so. Chuck steak roasts, pork shoulders, and beef short ribs all go from meh to gourmet in the tender care of your cooker. That's why it's a big mistake to throw your better cuts of meat, like ribeyes or filet mignon, into the slow cooker. Why would you do that? They're already more tender and require less cooking time. So if you're going to splurge on a fancy cut of meat, cook it in a manner befitting it. Save those cheap cuts of meat for the slow cooker. Your wallet and your stomach will thank you. In the right circumstances, adding wine to a recipe creates succulent meat dishes, savory poached veggies, and an overall tenderness that's hard to beat. The operative words here are the right circumstances, and inside a slow cooker isn't usually the right circumstance for cooking with wine and other alcohol. If anything, slow cookers plus boozy recipes equals a drunken dinner. This has to do with the evaporation rate of different types of alcohol. Normally, the stove's high heat makes the ethanol evaporate, leaving behind the components that are known for making food tender and tasty. Slow cookers, you know, they got their name for a reason. Eventually, the slow cooker heats up to proper temps, but that process takes hours. Plus, with the lid on, the booze in your recipe isn't evaporating, leaving your dinner with all the bitterness of booze gone wrong. There are some instances where you can add alcohol to a slow cooker meal, but usually those involve either pouring the alcohol in at the last minute or cooking some of the recipe on the stove before you transfer it to the slow cooker. If you'd still like to experiment with wine in your recipes, you may find it helpful to cook from recipes that are specifically adapted to such a task until you get a feel for how you do it. The quality that makes cheese so dang tasty when it's melted is also the thing that will make it and other dairy curdle in the slow cooker. The trick isn't to avoid cooking with dairy in the slow cooker, rather, it's knowing how to cook with dairy in your recipes to avoid the dreaded curdling syndrome. First, some types of dairy, fatty cheeses such as cheddar or Parmesan for example, hold up better in the slow cooker. Generally, the more fat a cheese has, the less curdling happens, though this has its limits. Second, just because a cheese has a lower fat content doesn't mean you can't add it to your slow cooker recipes. It's okay to do this, but you want to wait until the last half hour or hour of cooking before you add in the melty stuff. When it comes to slow cooking, cheese should be one of the final ingredients you drop into the slow cooker. This isn't just for cheese, by the way. The same holds true for all dairy products you intend to cook with. They go in last.